Subscribe to Soul of Kindness for more heart-touching stories. She signed the divorce papers with shaking hands, not because she wanted to leave, but because she had seen the photos herself, the messages, the hotel receipt. Everything pointed to one truth: her husband had betrayed her. But what if every single piece of that evidence had been placed there by someone who needed them apart? Margaret Calloway had always believed that love, real love, was quiet. It didn't shout. It didn't demand attention. It just stayed. And for 11 years, Daniel Calloway had been exactly that kind of love for her. He woke up before her every morning just to make sure her coffee was warm when she came downstairs. He remembered the names of her patients. She was a nurse, and asked about them by name at dinner. He held her hand during storms, not because she was scared, but because he knew she pretended not to be. 11 years. One daughter, Lily, who was 9 years old and had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. Their home in Cincinnati was not perfect. No home is, but it was full of small rituals, inside jokes, and the kind of comfortable silence that only people who truly know each other can share. Margaret never thought any of it could disappear in a single afternoon, but on a Tuesday in October it did. She came home early from her shift at St. Vincent's Hospital. She was exhausted, her feet aching, her heart already soft from a long day of watching people fight for their lives. She just wanted to sit beside her husband and say nothing. Instead, she found an envelope on the kitchen counter. No name on it, no return address, just sitting there waiting. Inside were photographs, hotel photographs. Daniel in a room she didn't recognize, with a woman she had never seen. Laughing, close, intimate, in the way that only people with secrets can be. Beneath the photos was a printed hotel receipt. Daniel Calloway, room 214, 4 nights. Margaret sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours without moving. When Daniel came home, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply placed the envelope in front of him and watched his face. He went pale. His mouth opened. He said, "Margaret, I have never..." But the photos were right there, and she was too tired, too broken, and too afraid of being a fool to believe a denial. She had not yet earned the right to trust. She asked him to leave that night. The divorce took 4 months. 4 months of lawyers and paperwork, and Lily crying in her bedroom, pressing her small face into her pillow so neither parent would hear. Daniel fought it. Not the settlement, not the custody arrangement, but the reason. He kept saying there was something wrong, that the photos were staged, that he had never been to that hotel, that someone had done this deliberately. Margaret's lawyer called it classic denial behavior. Her sister called it desperation. Margaret called it too late. She had spent those 4 months slowly convincing herself that the man she loved had been a performance, that the coffee every morning, the remembered names, the hand-holding during storms, all of it had been a lie layered over another life she never knew about. It was the only way she could survive signing those papers, because if she let herself believe him, if she cracked even a little, she would fall completely apart. So she signed. On a cold February morning, with snow falling outside the lawyer's office window, Margaret Calloway became Margaret Haynes again. Daniel stood outside the building afterward. He didn't try to stop her. He just looked at her with those same eyes she had loved for 11 years. And they were not angry. They were not cold. They were devastated. She looked away and got into her car. 6 weeks later, Daniel collapsed at work. He was brought into St. Vincent's Hospital by ambulance. Margaret was on shift. She didn't know it was him until she heard his name called over the intake radio. Calloway, Daniel, 41, unresponsive. Possible cardiac event, and the coffee cup she was holding simply fell from her hand. She was not assigned to his case. Hospital policy, combined with their recent divorce, made sure of that. But she stood at the glass window of the trauma bay and watched the team work on him. And she felt something she had spent months trying to bury rise up like a flood. She had no walls left to hold back. He looked so small on that gurney. Daniel, who was 6 feet tall and laughed loudly and carried Lily on his shoulders at county fairs, looked small and grey and frighteningly still. The attending physician, Dr. Reyes, stabilized him within the hour. It was not a heart attack as they first suspected. It was a toxic reaction, something in his bloodstream that should not have been there. Margaret overheard this in the hallway and stopped walking. A toxic reaction. She went home that night and could not sleep. She lay in the dark next to Lily, who had climbed into her bed without asking and stared at the ceiling. Toxic reaction. Staged photographs. 4 nights at a hotel he swore he never visited. For the first time in months, a different question rose inside her. What if he was telling the truth? She didn't go to see him right away. She told herself it was inappropriate, that it would confuse Lily, that it was none of her business anymore. But 3 days later, she found herself standing outside, room 318 at 7 in the morning before her shift started, holding a cup of the same coffee she used to drink when he made it for her, because her hands needed something to hold. He was awake. He looked at her, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then she said, "I heard what they found in your blood." He nodded slowly. Sedatives, a significant dose, Dr. Reyes thinks. I'd been given them over a period of weeks without knowing. Margaret felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet. Weeks, she repeated. Someone was putting it in my coffee, they think. At work, he paused. Or somewhere else. She set her cup down on the bedside table. Her hands were shaking now, and she didn't want him to see. Daniel, she said carefully. The hotel receipt had 4 nights on it. He looked at her. I know. You could have been. She stopped. If someone was sedating you, I could have been there and not known it, he finished. His voice was quiet. Not accusing, just quiet. I know, Margaret. I've been thinking about nothing else. She left before she started crying. She walked to the supply closet at the end of the hall, closed the door, and sat on the floor in the dark for 10 minutes. Because the thought taking shape in her mind was not small. It was not forgivable. If she was right, if someone had sedated Daniel, placed him in that hotel room, photographed him without his knowledge, and then delivered those photos to her door, then she had divorced an innocent man. She had destroyed her family over a lie someone else had told. She started quietly. She didn't go to the police, not yet. She went to the source. Daniel's workplace was a mid-sized architecture firm in downtown Cincinnati. He had worked there for 9 years. Margaret had attended every Christmas party, knew the receptionist by name, knew which colleagues he liked and which ones he tolerated. She also knew about Victor Hale. Victor was a senior partner at the firm. Handsome, successful, and Margaret had always sensed this without ever saying it aloud. Deeply interested in her. Not in an obvious way. In the careful, patient way of someone who had decided to wait. She had mentioned this to Daniel once, 2 years ago, half joking. Daniel had laughed it off. She wasn't laughing now. She spoke to 2 of Daniel's closest colleagues on the pretense of collecting his personal items from his desk while he recovered. In conversation, careful, indirect conversation, she learned 3 things. 1. Victor had been the one to suggest Daniel's coffee order be switched to a new brand delivered to the office. Said it was a firm perk. Everyone thought it was generous. 2. Victor had been at the same hotel, the one on the receipt, the same weekend. Daniel was supposedly there. A client meeting that no one could quite remember the details of. 3. Victor had asked about Margaret recently. Specifically, he had asked whether she and Daniel were doing okay. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Victor Hale had called Margaret. She had not answered. She had thought it was inappropriate and deleted the voicemail without listening to it. She retrieved it now. His voice was warm and practiced. Margaret, I heard about you and Daniel. I'm so sorry. I just want you to know, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. I've always been here. She played it twice. Then she drove to the police station. The investigation moved faster than she expected. Victor Hale, it turned out, had not been as careful as he believed himself to be. The hotel had security footage. Daniel appeared on camera being escorted in by a man in a cap, but the cap slipped once, briefly, in an elevator. Victor's face was visible for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. The sedative found in Daniel's blood was traced to a prescription. A prescription written under a name that didn't exist. But the pharmacy that filled it had a credit card record. The card was a prepaid, but the purchase IP address, traced through the pharmacy's online refill portal, led back to a laptop registered to Victor Hale. And the envelope, the one left on Margaret's kitchen counter, had been handled without gloves. One partial fingerprint on the inner flap. Victor Hale was arrested on a Thursday morning, 11 weeks after Daniel had been brought into St. Vincent's by ambulance. Margaret heard about it from a detective who called her at work. She walked outside to the hospital parking lot and stood in the cold, April air and felt nothing for a long moment. Just a ringing silence, like the world had stopped making sound. Then she felt everything at once. Every morning she had made coffee alone. Every night Lily had asked why Daddy wasn't home for dinner. Every moment she had spent reinforcing her own anger because it was the only thing keeping her upright. All of it, built on a foundation that had never existed. She drove to Daniel's apartment. He had rented a small place across town and knocked on his door at 6 in the evening without calling first. He opened the door and saw her face. He didn't ask questions. He just stepped back to let her in. The apartment was sparse. He hadn't decorated it the way their house was decorated, because it was never meant to be a home. It was just a place to sleep while he waited. She didn't know if he had been waiting for her, or for the truth, or simply for life to make sense again. But something in the bareness of those walls broke her open in a way that the last year had not. "I believed them," she said. Her voice was unsteady. "I believed the photos, and I didn't ask enough questions, and I told Lily that families change and that it wasn't anyone's fault, and Margaret, I ended us, Daniel. I ended us, and it wasn't real. None of it was real, and Margaret." He crossed the room and took both her hands, the way he had during storms. "Stop." She looked up at him. "I know you," he said. "I know why you believed it. You believed it because you were exhausted and you were scared, and because the evidence was designed by someone who studied you long enough to know exactly what would break you." He paused. "That is not a failure of love. That is what happens when someone very deliberately destroys something." She shook her head. "I should have fought harder." "So should I," he said quietly. "I kept trying to prove it to lawyers, and I never—" He stopped. "I should have fought harder for you specifically, not for the truth in a courtroom. For you." They stood there in the bare apartment holding hands, with a year of wreckage between them and around them. Neither of them had a map for what came next. But for the first time in 12 months, Margaret felt something she had convinced herself was gone. She felt like she was standing in the right place. The legal process that followed was neither quick nor simple. Victor Hale was charged with criminal drugging, fraud, and evidence tampering. His trial lasted 3 weeks. He showed no remorse in court, only the quiet, contained dignity of a man who believed that wanting something badly enough justified whatever you did to obtain it. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 9 years. Margaret and Daniel did not rush. They went to counseling, together and separately. They told Lily the truth in the gentlest way they could find, and Lily, who was 9 and fierce and far wiser than her years, looked at both of them and said, "So you fixed it?" And Daniel had laughed, a real laugh, the loud kind that filled the room, and said, "We're working on it, Bug." "Okay," said Lily, and went back to her drawing. It took 8 months before Margaret and Daniel were in the same home again. 8 months of slow, careful rebuilding, of relearning how to trust the ordinary moments, how to not flinch when something good happened in case it was taken away. On the night she moved back in, Daniel woke up before her. She came downstairs to find a cup of coffee waiting, still warm. She stood in the kitchen holding it with both hands for a long time. Some things, once broken, never return to exactly the shape they had before. But sometimes, if the love is real, and the people are willing, and the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, what grows back in the broken places is stronger than what was there before. Margaret had spent a year grieving a love she thought had betrayed her. What she learned, in the end, was this: real love does not always protect you from pain. Sometimes it walks straight through the worst pain imaginable, and it is still standing on the other side, holding a warm cup of coffee, waiting for you to come downstairs. Victor Hale wanted to take something that was never his to take, and the only thing his plan truly destroyed was himself. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Soul of Kindness and tell us in the comments. Have you ever almost lost someone because of a lie you were meant to believe?